everyone. This is update for January 25, 2023, day 336 of the war and of the date update. So today just gonna focus on military situation in just Ukraine. So first news that sort of strategic level is that I mentioned before Ukrainian parliament that is totally controlled by Ukrainian president. Basically, it's in his pocket. That it passed a law that essentially turned all of Ukrainian army into one big penal unit, similar to Wagner mercenaries, or similar to the Soviet army during World War II, where there was penal units and there were special units behind the regular units that should kill you if you try to retreat. So it's not as sort of strong, but essentially, if you don't fulfill the order of the officer or whoever or your superior, you're gonna go immediately to jail for, I don't remember, 8-10 years, something like that, basically. So that law was signed by Ukrainian president, it's effective, I believe, pretty much immediately. So again, this is a huge step in the wrong direction. It is a disrespectful to people who fight on the ground and basically spitting in their face and saying, okay, you just cannon fodder and a slave and you're going to be used as needed. And in the end, it's going to terrifically backfire and create actually tremendous problems, which probably we're already seeing in the North Donbass section of the front line. So again, this is the first step into creating some potential huge catastrophe on the front line, where some people will be retreating or surrendering and didn't care about what they sort of about the threats of the prison threats. So this goes back to the absolute incompetence and parasitic attitude of Ukrainian sort of political top and military top, and absolute, they simply unfit to win this war and to defend Ukraine. So that's first one. The other news is on the surface is much more positive, and there is an announcement that Ukraine is going to get 31 M1, I think A1 or A2 Abrams tanks, and then it looks like somewhere from 80 to even 100 Leopard 2 tanks, different modifications. A4, A6, I believe, A5, and potentially a little bit of A7, which is the most modern and recent one from Denmark, but that's going to be a small number, like 8 to 10 units. But overall, this tank is obviously up-to-date, modern. It's not what I used to call military junk, like such as Leopard 1 or T-55 that 47th Brigade got, and hopefully it will not be sort of battle tested somehow. Hopefully somehow it will get replaced before it actually goes into the fight. So there are a couple. So on the surface, yeah, it's a positive news, right? Plus those 12 Challenger tanks, which in my opinion is the best tanks out of all of the three. But if you really look a little bit sort of under the hood, there are many problems here. So first problem with the Leopard tanks is it's unclear when they're gonna come. It may take 2-3 months before they come, but they need it essentially in a matter of weeks, maybe at most months, when Russia will be probably launching its offensive. Similar situation seems to me that with Abrams, because they actually not going to be um, taking from the U.S. reserve, but apparently they're going to be procured. So basically, either manufactured new, which obviously going to take some time, or purchased from other countries somewhere. So again, this is again kind of like a little bit pie in the sky situation where okay, eventually it's going to happen, but the question is when. So actually, the most realistic is actually those Challenger 2 tanks, which are the best. But unfortunately, I think it's 14 tanks only. At the same time, in the right hands, they could be extremely useful, even those 14 tanks. So that's the first. The timing is, but it's relatively okay. Hopefully, things work out and they will come hopefully on time. The bigger problem, and that's what I, mentioned yesterday and was saying this before, is this tank's advantage of these tanks is not particularly the cannon or not special armor. They are maybe slightly better than T90, T72, T80, T64, but it's not exceeding advantage. The advantage of this tanks is the communication equipment and an ability to coordinate attacks. So basically, you're not attacking as a standalone unit, a standalone tank, but actually as a group. And that's a huge, huge, huge advantage. And the problem with the current structure of Ukrainian army, how it works, that feature of these tanks is simply not going to be used. It's just basically dead. They're going to be used like as if this is standalone T64, T72, whatever, T80, and that essentially removes that advantage that they have, and essentially brings them down very close to the current Russian tanks. And so that's really where the big challenge and big problem with this with let's say ability of Ukrainian army to use them effectively. That's where, in my opinion, they're not going to be used effectively. Essentially, as long as Ukrainian army the way it is, they're going to be misused. And sort of this problem becomes more and more sort of pronounced and more clear with the defeat on in Soledar and North Donbass and continuing defeat there, and inability to use this long range, high precision 155 millimeter howitzers that Ukraine has, and it has more of those than Russia, like significantly more. So you can already create um, basically big problem for the Russian artillery, and it's not happening again for the same reason. Organizationally, Ukrainian army cannot use them the way it's organized. It organizes a Soviet army of the whatever 60s, 70s. That is really effectively just improved version of World War II army, and so of Soviet army. I wouldn't even say World War II, and so it's just not designed to use basically high tech equipment, and so it cannot do it effectively. And not to mention that let's call it like 100 whatever 140 in total of these tanks. It's just simply not enough, even if they use sort of in proper way. It's just simply not enough to really change significantly situation on battlefield. If they were properly used, they can create huge problem, huge headache for the Russian military. There's no question about it. But effectively, the way they're going to be probably used, that ability is diminished significantly. I cannot say for sure right now by how much, but I'm extremely skeptical about that. There are other problems related to these tanks. Not A, but let's say next one is they are much heavier than Soviet tanks, and so they require again coordination, careful planning, careful thinking and different kind of crews by their nature, by design, than what sort of right now Ukraine has. Otherwise, they're just simply gonna get stuck on the battlefield because they are heavy and their ability to move across terrain is definitely probably lower than, let's say, the Soviet tanks. And those this T-64, T-72, T-80, they already have sort of their own problems relative to Soviet World War II tanks. So they already sort of, how to say, degraded, right? And these tanks, they are extremely heavy. So for example, Challenger, I think is like up to 70. I'm gonna say 70 ton, or at least at minimum 65, and more like towards 75 tons, metric tons. That's a challenge, and they unfortunately don't have wide tracks to properly address that heavyweight. That heavyweight by itself may be okay, but they don't have wide tracks. Basically, they're not designed for this theater of operation, even though, which is interesting, that they being designed to fight the Soviet Union. So I don't know how that sort of for the engineers and didn't come that okay, we need to design so it needs to work in the Soviet Union. So basically, you're facing the same challenges that the German army was facing when it invaded Soviet Union. The same issue. The lessons were not really learned in a way. Um, so that's another big challenge there. Um, so we'll see what happens out of it, but I would say, pretty skeptical about the effectiveness or ability to effectively use those tanks that are extremely potent if used correctly by the current Ukrainian army. Now let's switch to the walk through the front line. We're gonna do walkthrough starting from the north, and then we're gonna go down in a clockwise fashion. So the situation along the state border is more or less quiet, nothing essential there. Now let's jump to North Lugansk front line. Things here are also more or less stable. Russian command is continuing attacks in the same location. So this is again like the feature of the Soviet army. The same is true for Ukrainian army, the same for Russian. And now we're seeing then the same sort of incompetence on the Russian side, where they're essentially attacking in the same locations. Like here around Nevsky, close to Kazemivka, and in this area. So essentially, it creates huge opportunity to inflict extremely heavy losses on the attackers, and that's not happening because again, they're being opposed by the same incompetent Soviet army. So essentially, they attack and they don't advance, but at the same time, the losses are not as heavy as they could have been if the situation properly used. But otherwise, situation here is so far stable for Ukrainian side. Even though there is very clear build-up of the Russian sort of potentially attacking force here around Crimea, but we'll see what comes out of that. Now let's look at North Donbass front line, where things sort of the worst for Ukrainian side. So far, this day was sort of without major sort of losses or problems for Ukrainian army. As I said many times before, it doesn't mean anything. This just means that Wagner mercenaries quietly working, that capturing some strongholds that we're not hearing about. That's just you don't know unless you are basically in the trenches or somewhere extremely close to the front line. And that's probably what's happening right now. Once those key strongholds were captured, then the floodgate falls, and then we're gonna see this, advances by the Wagner mercenaries, essentially. So this is like how this whole situation happens. So here, you know, they continuing the attack towards Ivanivsky, which at this point is, I think, it's very clear to everyone that this is the key. They get here, they essentially got like 80% of their goal of creating untenable situation for Ukrainian command and essentially forcing withdrawal from Bakhmut. That in itself will create a problem where Ukrainian command will have to vacate all of this area around Siversk and essentially move to this area around Kaleniki in Kiforivka and so on. So basically, new front line here essentially. If well, if Bakhmut falls, hopefully it's if, not when. But that's just so situation remains extremely difficult. We're just kind of like in the eye of the storm right now. There. Now let's look at central Donbass front line. So, as I said before, you can contrast this area with situation up north, where there is regular Russian army operates, and it's incompetent. Again, just cannot. I will repeat this many times. So the same attacks, the same area, Marinka, million times, Pisky, Salyan, million times. By the way, Russian side, they claim that they captured village Vodyanay in this area where I'm showing where this attack, but it's kind of like in a valley, so essentially it's sort of similar to Pavlivka, where you capture it, but holding it is extremely costly, and they already did capture it in the past, and they left because they just basically being destroyed by artillery fire because they are kind of in a wall in perfect target. So again, it's just essentially like sounds like for propaganda process on Russia's side. Okay, we captured something, but you basically captured the stone on your neck. So in a way, better not to capture it in some ways. But nevertheless, they announced this, but it's nothing sort of major there. Situation basically remains the same. Then Russian side is putting pressure here in the south on 72nd Brigade, and I would say they do sustain serious losses. So it's not easy for them to sort of withstand the pressure here. Nevertheless, so far they're still holding on Vuhledar. The only advanced, not even advanced, but what Russian side captured that was from this eastern side attack. It's called like a outside of Vuhledar, basically like kind of like a cottages for like gardening that people had. So there's kind of like a tiny village there. They managed to capture it, but it's just kind of like not on the high ground as Vuhledar is. So in a way, it's kind of similar situation to Pavlivka. And then here they bogged down as well. So essentially, looks like this pressure was strong, but they bogged down again. But at the same time, it costs Ukrainian side, casualties among the 72nd Brigade, which again was one of the better ones. I'm not saying it's the best, but it's definitely quite a bit above average in Ukrainian army. So again, that's from a perspective of sort of war of attrition. That's a negative because again, you're undermining one of your stronger units, and at the same time, there's not much you can do because there's not many available reserves Ukrainian command has at this moment. But so far, it holds on. Let's put it this way, and it looks like it will be able to hold on. At the same time, anything can happen. Now let's quickly check Zaporizhya front line. So things here completely bogged down for the Russian side. As if you remember, they were attacking on this like wide front line, starting from here around this Guляйpilske, well, south from this. I think there's village Cherevne here, all the way to Kaminsky. Initially, they managed to make some advances by capturing essentially first line of the trenches, but then essentially everything broke down, and that's the status quo of it. So again, the same approach: regular Russian army, incompetent, incapable, uh, cannot do much about it unless they exceed Ukrainian side by, 3, 4, 5 times. Then they can do something. But there is no such advantage so far. There is some minimal advantage probably, but it's not large enough to cover in level of incompetence there. And the same true for Ukrainian side, right? So when Ukrainian side tries to attack, it also needs some extremely strong advantage, in order to succeed. Otherwise, it's the same situation. So far, this situation stabilized here on the Zaporizhya front line, but it does look that there was just a probing attack by the Russian command, and there will be more attacks. So they sort of seeking for the weakness now on this entire front line, starting from Ugledar all the way to Kaminsky. So as you can see, they tried here, didn't work out. Now they're trying again Ugledar, which probably will not gonna work out. They tried Novosilka, they tried the villages along this road between Pavlivka and Ugledar, Novosilka, didn't work out. So it's possible that they will try to attack here around Hulaypole. That's another sort of area, or I don't even know. Maybe they can try to kind of continue building this wedge, even though it becomes a little bit dangerous for them. So we'll see what happens in the next several days, but it's very clear that the Russian side is on the move, let's put it this way. And plus, all of this new equipment creates incentive on the Russian side to attack sooner than later, because they understand once the equipment comes, it's still net positive for Ukrainian side. It improves defensive capabilities, and so you want to attack before that, that those weapons arrive to the front line. So that's creating another incentive, and we'll see if this large offensive will happen sooner than later, because if not, then the chances of any success are going to be much more significantly lower, or Russia will need to beef up its army by pulling even more sort of recruits into the army, which I believe will be politically hard. I mean, that they will do it, but if needed. But that's something that Russian political leadership wants to avoid as much as possible. There's also talk about using tactical nuclear weapons, which is another sort of alternative that could be considered by Russia. And this is something you never know, sort of what's in the head of the Russian political leadership, because I would say anything is possible at this point. And hopefully that doesn't happen, but you never know. So that's it for the day. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.